head of the Port Authority, who said that formal search and rescue operations haven't even begun yet. The bulk of the effort right now by the police and the fire department and others is simply to establish the integrity, the safety of the World Trade Center building. Second, what's left on the site of the World Trade Center. Secondly, Peter, they reported that there's a staggering number of firefighters still on the site, up to 200 that they can't account for yet. They were able to talk to one firefighter on the scene, though, who said that their biggest problem now is not having fire hydrants to put out these small pockets of fires that are cropping up all across the site. And secondly, Peter, there's a problem now with broken gas lines, which they fear could ignite further explosions.
George, could
Peter,
I just...
if I might add.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I just add one thing. I was struck by something at St. Vincent's. The Red Cross, as you may know, has put out a plea for blood donors, particularly those with the less common types of blood, such as O. But even before that plea went out, thousands of people spontaneously showed up at St. Vincent's, thousands of people, and many of them told us, this is what we think we can do to help. We can't do anything else. Sitting at home watching on television won't help, but this might.
Well, Bob, you're quite right. And in fact, there's no reason you would have heard us, but we mentioned a short while ago that blood donors in Nebraska, one of their first instincts, or people in Nebraska, one of their first instincts was to go and respond to a request for blood donations because, as you've just pointed out and we've said before, there's a critical shortage of blood in the United States. And we've heard from the Red Cross any number of times in the last year or so that the country needs blood and it's not going to be available. And so it is reassuring to hear in New York City people doing that instinctively. Bob, let me ask you both, and start with you and then George. My sense of the recovery, if that's the word for it, of this phase of what's going on down there is to deal with people who are injured, who are clearly not in or under the World Trade Towers. Am I right?
Yes, I think that's correct, and a large number of them, in one way or another, are some of the emergency and rescue people. And then the next step, as we have seen in other disasters, will be to see who else there is.
And George, we've seen buildings collapsed. It sometimes takes days to discover people under collapsed buildings, and we now have a circumstance. Do we have any idea how many people got out before the building collapsed? We don't, do we?
Not a very good idea, Peter. We do know that there was some warning. As I said earlier, we spoke to some of the security guards who were on the site, and they did have some warning. There was a feeling that the second building was going to collapse, so the evacuation did begin from people as high up as in the 82nd and 86th floors, but we don't know how many were able to get out. And we do know, Peter, from at least one of the security guards, that they were nowhere near complete. They hadn't come even close to completing the evacuation, but we don't have numbers.
And Peter, adding a little bit to the confusion, the collapse of the North Tower may have affected other buildings around there, as well as the collapse of the Millennium Hotel.
Well, thank you both very much, and both of you come back at any time that you want and can or contribute to this. We can tell you that the military, thank you both very much, Bob Jamieson and George Stephanopoulos.
Thank you.
We can tell you that the military, the governor said earlier, the governor of New York, that the National Guard was going to come in, and there's National Guard on station in some parts of the city anyway, is setting up a temporary morgue on the piers in New York City near West 57th Street, which is where people often take off to go and have a tour of New York City from the air, and close by where the famous Circle Line leaves, so people can take a tour around the island of Manhattan and see what it looks like. And none of that traffic is permitted today. The only traffic we have seen on the Hudson River has been, as has been pointed out to us several times, John Miller particularly, pointing out that ferries are taking wounded across the river, across the Hudson River to New Jersey. ABC's Cynthia McFadden is on the phone at the moment. She is calling us from Bellevue Hospital, which is over on the east side of Manhattan, quite some distance from this. Sylvia, do you hear me? Cynthia, do you hear me?
I do, Peter.
Can you tell us what's going on there?
Yeah, we've been able to get into the Disaster Command Center, which is located here at Bellevue. As you say, it's about 20 or 30 blocks north and east of the actual site of the Twin Towers. But this is where the city puts its resources to prepare for an emergency. They rehearse here, practice here for disasters, and today we were allowed in the first group of journalists to go inside and see where they were running the disaster relief from. Let me paint a picture for you. if I might, of the room. It's about a 30 by 15 room, about 10 people crowded around a conference table, about 15 phone lines coming into the room. The mayor's office, emergency services, police and fire, all of those efforts being coordinated through this room. It was surprisingly calm, surprisingly quiet. It is located in the heart of the emergency room here at Bellevue Hospital, Peter, and the emergency room itself is busy. They've had about 140 to 150 people come through Bellevue so far. We've also had the opportunity to talk to the director of the hospital here and to the man who heads up the emergency room. I can tell you a little bit about the injuries if you'd like.
Please do.
Because this is a hospital further away, they're getting the less seriously injured, although, having said that, of the 140 or 50 people, 40 of them are classified in serious condition. 2 were dead on arrival. They have 1 baby who is being treated. 3 to 5 operating rooms are currently going with what the doctor characterized as extremely serious surgeries. The doctor running the operation here said that they have sent a team of physicians closer to the site, and they're going to be setting up tent hospitals closer to the site to help some of the enormous flow of injuries. Nobody made it here to this hospital until about 2 hours after the blast, and they believe, I've been listening to the coverage, they believe that it's not going to be for many more hours until they feel the full brunt of this over here.
Okay. Thank you, Cynthia, very much. Come back to us, please. When you get even better handle of this. We've talked a little bit about the blood shortage, which, as I said, is a national issue. But in New York City, there are supplies of blood so far. People did respond very quickly and lined up ready to give blood at some of the blood centers here. There is a supply of O-type blood. O negative appears, as best we can understand from the people who are collecting it, is the most important kind of blood needed at the moment because it's the universal donor, meaning anyone can actually get it. Now, there's a slight bit more of information, like all information today, reasonably suspect at the outset, but the Associated Press is reporting that this airliner, this United Airlines jet, which crashed in Pennsylvania, which is a American Airlines, my apologies, United Airlines Flight 93. I don't quite know exactly what aircraft it was, a 767, I think, which we assessed uncertain about, did not know why it had crashed, whether it was part of this overall operation this morning. The AP is now quoting a man who minutes earlier, saying he was a passenger on the plane, told an emergency dispatcher in a cell phone call that we are being hijacked. We are being hijacked. Treat that, as you do all the information we give you today, as being preliminary at best, sometimes wrong. I think we've been pretty good about it today, and certainly confused, because listening to the mayor, listening to the governor of the state, both of whom we talked to, listening to the senator in charge of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, listening to all of our analysts, listening to everybody, the country is still very much in the middle of, if not immediate post-event chaos, certainly in terms of trauma, and trying to get a handle on what the hell's been going on here. And as we've said before, when you look at the television pictures of the Trade Center collapsed upon itself, these are buildings 110 stories high, and where thousands and thousands and thousands of people work. And I know on occasion we can run the images of it to the point of offensiveness. I hope we're not there. But this is what it looked like when one of the trade towers just appeared to either peel away or collapse on itself, but from top to bottom, 110 stories to the bottom. First one, the southern tower, Tower 1 or Tower 2, it doesn't matter what, just one tower and then the other, and then the other tower sometime later, which John Miller said the cops picked up very quickly, was looking weak and bending or leaning in one particular direction, indicating that when those two aircraft, one hitting one tower, the other hitting another, had gone straight into those towers with such force that even at the midpoint of the building, or in that case 2/3 up, something had happened to so totally weaken the infrastructure that this was like peeling a banana, except that it was full of people, or had many, many people in it. I think we have Senator John McCain on the phone from Washington. Am I right, Senator?
Yes, Peter, how are you?
I'm well, sir, thank you. I'm not well. None of us are well. You know that.
Yes.
What's on your mind?
Well, I think that this act obviously is one which would constitute an act of war. I believe that the American people should remain calm and rally behind our president, and I'm confident that our military and our president will find out the perpetrators of this outrage, and we will not only punish those responsible, but ensure that something like this never happens again. And clearly, we need to look at our intelligence capabilities.
I don't mean for one second, Senator, to belittle the necessary thing you must say today, which is we'll find those who are responsible and we'll punish them, because Tony Cordesman has just pointed out very effectively how often we don't find the people and we don't get to punish them. But you say an act of war.
Yes.
Do you believe that if another country is somehow the patron of an individual or a group of individuals who has done this, we should go to war with that country?
Absolutely, because they have committed atrocity on a scale that's unprecedented in history that I know of. Everybody's talking about a second Pearl Harbor. At least that was an attack on military targets, not on the civilian community. This is an unspeakable outrage, and clearly we can and must find out who perpetrated it. And Tony Cordesman and I have great respect for him, but I believe that we have the capability to find it out, and we need to improve our intelligence capabilities, particularly in the area of human intelligence. We have wonderful satellite capabilities and technical capabilities. In the late 70s and early 80s, we, for all intents and purposes, dismantled our human intelligence capability, which divines motives, and that's something technical intelligence cannot do.
Well, I think those of us who cover intelligence in any way, Senator, know that human intelligence, or HUMINT as they call it in the trade, has been very difficult, particularly in places like Afghanistan. So just assume for a second, well, no, don't assume anything, but are you desperately frustrated at the moment in some respects because this was sort of, in many ways, this was bound to happen in some measure, and we may not be able to get at the perpetrators?
No, I think that among many other things, obviously sorrow is the overriding emotion, but also I don't think our lives will ever be the same again in some respect, especially those who use airliners with some frequency. There's always been questions and studies and tests of our airport security systems, and they've always found breaches in them. Obviously, that's going to have to be addressed, and that's going to be very inconvenient for Americans. But at the same time, we also have to reevaluate the importance of making sure that anyone who wants to try it is incapable of doing so. But the best way to address it, obviously, is going to the source.
Your Democratic colleague, Senator Biden, said a while ago, the terrorist wins again when it alters American lifestyle. I assume you believe the same thing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the things that have been inflicted on the American people is, I mean, it staggers the imagination. And yet I believe that the best thing that we can do as Americans is remain calm, rally behind the President of the United States, and know with confidence that we will take whatever steps are necessary to prevent this from happening again. I don't think that there's any reason for Americans to feel a sense of panic.
Okay. Thank you, Senator McCain, very much indeed. Appreciate your time. Senator John McCain of Arizona, who knows a lot about violence, and many people in the country will think knows a lot about leadership as well. Former presidential candidate, often talking about doing it, or often considered to be doing it again. Claire Shipman is in Washington. Claire, where's Mr. Bush?
Well, Peter, we have a little bit of news on that front. As you know, he is in the air again on his way somewhere from Shreveport, Louisiana. We have been told by sources that he will not be coming to Washington. He is going to make another stop at an undisclosed secure location so that He can talk to people from there on the ground. His security team can assess just how safe it is back here in Washington. As you mentioned earlier, that there must be great political pressure for him to get back to Washington. These sources confirm just that. The political team wants him back home. He wants to come back home. His security team does not feel it is safe right now. They do think, though, and they're guessing right now, that he might be able to get back at some point this evening. But again, he's got at least one more stop. Another interesting point along those lines.
Hold on. One more stop?
One more stop between Shreveport and Washington. He's on his way now, we're told, to another undisclosed location that his security team considers secure. They won't tell us where it is, obvious.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Maddox. Let's take a break from the ABC coverage and update you on what's happening here on the South Plains, how we are being affected by the nation's tragic events. Carrie Drennan is live now at United Blood Services. Carrie, we've been told that Lubbock is ready to donate. Is that the case? Okay, evidently having some problems. We'll get back to Carrie in just a moment. Updating continuing. The Lubbock Christian University is also having a blood drive on campus until 4 o'clock this afternoon. Also here on the South Plains, LISD schools have not been let out. Classes will end at their regular time today. The Federal Building in downtown Lubbock is still open, but many employees have gone home for the day. The South Plains Mall is closed now except for Dillard's and Sears. They remain open. All flights out at Lubbock International Airport have been delayed indefinitely. ABC 28's Gina Long is at the airport, and I guess with no takeoffs and landings, Gina, it's kind of quiet out there.
Yeah, Bill, well, actually, for about the past hour or so, there's not been much traffic at all. Most travelers have gone home, and they are not here. But the news is still trickling down. We actually had about 4 people that were out hunting all day, had no word about what had happened, had no idea, and they came to the airport to get their flight, and they were very shocked and surprised by what they heard and what they saw, an empty airport, of course. Now, all flights are grounded. The FAA required that all flights land at the nearest airport much earlier today, and 3 landed here at the Lubbock International Airport. 2 were from Southwest, and 1 was from American Airlines, but those people have all been either bussed out by a charter bus or have been set up in a hotel, or many people rented rental cars. There are no more rental cars available here at the airport. And today I did speak with some of those travelers, and here's what they had to say.
Everyone just realized that it was an emergency, that we just had to, wait until the plane landed and then find out what happened. And I imagine most people were thinking about what others were thinking and what to do next and things like that. But we were all happy that we were safe. That's the main thing.
Once you touched down at the airport here in Lubbock, what procedures did you take? What did they tell you you had to do?
Well, they weren't sure themselves. At first they said, no, you're going to have to get off, and then we didn't know what was going to happen. We got into the airport, and they had, on-the-spot announcements as soon as they found things, and they said that your luggage, you'd have to wait for your luggage, not to leave the airport, and that they weren't sure what was going to be happening next, that they would take care of us, though. And then later on, they decided to charter a bus, and they're going to take most of us to, I guess it's Albuquerque and Dallas by bus.
Now, I did speak to the director of aviation here at the airport, and he says they did increase security. They do have a security plan in place, but they are not disclosing any information about that plan for safety reasons. But again, there aren't many people here. Again, if you have any loved ones that were on American Airlines, you can call a number that is 1-800-245-0999. You can call that number to get information about them. But the airlines are asking that you please do not call the airport. Back to you in the studio, Bill.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Gina. Now, earlier, we were going to send it out to United Blood Services, where ABC 28's Carrie Drennan is standing by. Let's check in with Carrie right now.
Carrie Drennan reporting live now from United Blood Services. Bill, take a look back over here. Look at all the people in this lobby. The people have poured out, gotten in line. It's wrapping all the way through the back, and at some points out the door, people wanting to help out whatever way they can. In this situation, they're giving blood. We understand there is a vital need for blood because this is a site that could very soon be depleted if the blood supplies in New York get to an all-time low. But we're going to talk to some folks here who came out today about why they think it is so important. Sir, what's your name?
Matt Robinson.
Matt, why are you here?
Just felt the need to help out, the least I can do with what's going on in New York. Just wanted to come out and do my part here.
And what did you think when you saw
I was
those buildings?
horrified. I was on my way to school in the morning and just heard the report on the radio and got home at lunch and saw everything and just was horrified. That's all I can say.
So if, as you said, you're horrified by this, does it help you emotionally, personally, to know that you're helping out in this small way?
Yeah, I guess so. I just wanted to do something. I mean, it's so helpless here in Lubbock, and that's so far away. I just wanted to do something to help out.
And it does seem very far removed from what's going on in New York, Washington, D.C., but for you, sir, you also want to come out and do what you can. What's your name?
My name is Tracy McAllister, and I just got back from my church to pray, and came up here. You just feel like you need to do something, and we don't know what to do. I went to get my son at school, and the teacher said, please don't take him, because once he gets out of school, his whole life is going to change. So I had to do something.
Do you feel like you're making a difference?
I hope so. I just hope so.
Anything you want to say to encourage other folks to come out and give donations as well?
Please come out and give blood, because this nation's it was already depleted to begin with, and it's really going to be depleted with this disaster.
Okay, thank you both, guys. Also, if we could speak with Les Long really quickly here at United Blood Services. There have been some changes going on. Les, what's happening now?
Well, we're having a great response from the Lubbock community. We want to apologize for the wait, but one thing that you can do, if you can't get through on our telephones, feel free to come on out. We can go ahead and schedule you an appointment. If you can't get in today, or you're not able to wait for the period of time it would take, you can schedule and be able to come in and donate tomorrow or the next day. We know that the need for blood is not going to be something that's just immediate for one day. They're going to initially deplete the blood supply in New York using everything that would have been available there to take care of survivors, and then the blood supply will need to be built back up. And this is besides the fact that we'll probably have people being found for some time, because they're going to be doing rescue efforts ongoing. And we can know from what happened in Oklahoma City that there are likely to be survivors found for quite some time, and therefore we're going to need blood for a number of days. So if you're not able to come in and make the wait, please come in, make an appointment to be able to donate, and that way we can build the supply up.
Okay, so again, please don't get frustrated by the delay. You can still contribute. You can still give your blood that is vitally needed at this point, New York, Washington areas, and no doubt other locations in the near future. Reporting live from United Blood Services, Carrie Drennan, ABC 28 News.
Okay, thank you very much, Carrie. Another vital part is that many Lubbock churches are hosting prayer vigils all day, and if you'd like to find out where you can go to take part in any of these prayer services, just log on to texassize.com. We urge you to stay with ABC 28. We will continue to update you every half hour on the half hour, or rather every hour on the half hour, and we urge you to stay with ABC News, which we join now in progress.
This just before 9 o'clock, roughly 15 minutes earlier, an American Airlines jet hijacked from Boston had crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. There were 92 people on board.
It does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Oh my God. That looks like a second plane. Has just
I did not see a plane go in.
Minutes later, the second plane, the second tower. The fireball ate up the aircraft. It was a United Airlines flight, a 767 from Boston to Los Angeles. There had been 65 people on board.
I was happened to look on the first tower, and I actually saw people waving where the first plane crashed through, and then it was unbelievable seeing the second jet come crashing into the second tower. What is going on?
New York City was staggered.
As soon as he got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky.
We're going to interrupt this. We'll come back to this, I promise you, to go to a news conference being held by the Mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani.
And then, Governor, thank you very, very much for your assistance and your help and your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership through this crisis. This is a vicious attack upon New York. It's an attack upon America. It's an attack upon the whole concept of freedom and our way of life. And we cannot let these attacks succeed. First step has to be to make sure we do everything in our power to protect the people and to save the lives of those whose lives are still at risk and to help those who have been injured. And I want to commend the mayor, and I want to thank my colleagues from Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the federal government have all offered and made ready support to help us deal with this ongoing crisis. The people of New York are not only the freest and most diverse people in the world, we're also, I believe, the most capable of rising to meet the challenges of this type of attack. And right now, we want New Yorkers to remain calm, to go about their business, to appreciate the fact that everything to provide for their safety is being done, to appreciate that everything that can be done to provide for the health and the needs of the people who are still at risk is being done, and that we will continue to work to make sure that we get through this as strongly and quickly as possible. I want to thank the federal administration. Secretary Thompson has been on the phone with me a number of times, as well as the president, for what they are offering and prepared to do. And we're just confident that, well, this is a horrible attack and one that is despicable and really unthinkable in its magnitude. We will get through this, and we will continue to have a great and free country, state, and society.
Do we know the number of casualties at this point, sir?
I don't think we really want to speculate about that. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately. And I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible.
There are large
And I don't think we will know the answer to that until sometime tomorrow or the next day.
Were there large numbers of firefighters?
There are a large number of firefighters and police officers who are in harm's way. And we don't know how many we've lost. But there's no doubt we've lost some firefighters and police officers.
Do you know anything about the cause of the explosions that brought the two buildings down yet? Was it caused by the planes or by something else?
We believe that it was caused by the after effects of the planes hitting the buildings. We don't know of an additional explosion after that.
Could you tell us, do you expect any further attacks on New York? Is there anything to indicate that there could be more bombs, more planes out there? I know originally there was a report that 8 planes had been hijacked, 4 have only been accounted for. What about the remaining 4? And is there any possibility that there could be bombs on the ground planted by some...
We have no specific information to that effect. Obviously, the city is now closed. The airspace around the city is closed. And we are on heightened alert. But we have no specific information suggesting any further attack.
Can you tell us where the planes came from? Major warships coming into the port of New York.
I think to give the people of New York confidence, to show that the federal government is standing with us, and to just to make certain that nothing further happens. This has been a very, very difficult and traumatic day for the people of the United States and the people of the city. And I think that it's an act that shows that the federal government is going to do everything they can to support us and help us.
Can you give us an idea of the extent of the rescue effort that's going on right now in Lower Manhattan? What the scope of this operation?
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago, and the governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon. But right now they don't want to leave because they're searching for innocent citizens, and they're searching for some of their brothers and sisters.
Are you finding survivors?
Yes, we have some numbers that we can give you. We have 1,500 people at Liberty State Park who were evacuated, described as walking wounded. They were evacuated by ferry and other means. There are about 600 as of about 15 minutes ago in local hospitals that we account for, 600 people that are being treated in local hospitals. And there are 150 in particular that were critical, that were moved by EMS. New York City has 170 hospitals. So we have a lot of hospitals, and we're utilizing all of them. Probably the one that was the hardest hit was St. Vincent's Hospital. And I would like to just single them out and commend them, because as I was rushing down there, after the first plane hit, before the second, they were already deploying people on the street. I could see the doctors and nurses outside getting ready to receive people. And that was before the second plane actually hit the World Trade Center.
What was your experience down there?
Also blood donations. We have several sites for blood donations. 153 East 53rd Street, 66th and Amsterdam, which is the Red Cross, and 310 East 67th Street. If people want to do something and they can donate blood, that's going to help not just today, but tomorrow and the next day. This relief effort is going to take some time.
Mr. Mayor, you were one of the first people down there. Can you describe the scene in your own words, what you saw down there?
I don't know that I'm really able to describe it. It was the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my whole life. We saw the World Trade Center in flames, a big gaping hole all the way on the top of it. We could see people jumping from the top of the building. And then we went into Barclay Street, 75 Barclay Street, I think it was, and we were there when the building collapsed, and it collapsed in part on 75 Barclay Street. So we were trapped in the building for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, trying to get out different exits. And we finally went through a basement and came out 100 Park Place.
Did you ever fear for your own safety, sir?
Sure, yeah.
What went through your mind?
I don't think anything went through my mind other than making sure that we all remained calm and found an exit and just tried to figure out the most intelligent thing to do. Probably the same thing that went through the minds of 10,000 other New Yorkers who I could see on the streets, and I really have to commend them. If you really want to know what New Yorkers are all about, you just watch the way in which they handle themselves. They didn't panic. They moved deliberately. They moved swiftly. But they didn't hurt each other. They helped each other. I mean, these are just the most wonderful people in the world.
Do we know anything about the composition of that dust that blankets Lower Manhattan? Is there any asbestos or any hazardous material in that dust?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Mr. Mayor, there were reports of a gas explosion related to this as well. Are you aware of that? There was a gas leak or possible explosion?
We don't believe it. We don't believe that's the case.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us anything about where the planes come from, where the aircraft came from?
Bill Diamond reminds me that we've turned off the gas in the city buildings, just to be certain.
Can you tell us
as a
anything
precaution
about where these aircraft came from? There was a report they may have been hijacked in Boston.
I think we should leave. I think we should leave that up to the federal government to. Yes, we do have some information, but I think we should leave that up to the federal government to release that information. Our focus is on the relief efforts. And
Governor,
What about security for the rest of the
on the part of the United States for what happened here in this country, both in New York, Washington, and places?
First step right now, Marcia, is to make sure we do everything to help those people who need our support, and whether they're injured or still trapped in buildings. The second thing is to make sure at the same time we're providing the maximum security against possible additional incidents. But clearly, this is an attack upon America. It's an attack upon our freedom and our way of life, and we must retaliate and go after those who perpetuated this heinous crime against the people of America.
Mayor, this is compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war? This has been compared.
I'll do both.
This has been compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to
This
be
is
an act of war?
this is a vicious, unprovoked, horrible attack on innocent men, women, and children. It's one of the most heinous acts, certainly in world history. And as the governor said, and I said to the president, we fully and completely support him in any action that he has to take in order to make an example out of the people who are responsible for this.
Is it an act of war in your mind?
I don't know that I want to use those words. I think the president is the one that has to respond, and I think what he has to know is that all of us in New York support him and support him completely in the efforts that he's going to have to make over the next couple of days, week, and to make a point that people can't do this. You can't attack innocent men, women, and children. And ultimately, I'm totally confident that American democracy and the American rule of law will prevail. And the people of New York are going to help to demonstrate that over the next couple of days.
Anybody take responsibility for this? Any group take responsibility at this time? And what is the city doing to safeguard the citizens now that something like this has happened?
Well, first of all, I don't know of anyone that's taken responsibility for it at this time. And secondly, the New York City Police Department is fully deployed, not just in the rescue effort, but all throughout the city of New York, offering as much protection and as much security as we're capable of for the citizens of the city. And at this point, I believe that the people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our support for all of the people that were viciously attacked today by going about their lives and showing everyone that vicious, cowardly terrorists can't stop us from being a free country and a place that functions. And we'll do everything we can to make that point.
Jennifer Steinauer, please. Just a housekeeping thing. Can you please tell us what's going to happen to the New York primary?
This morning, I issued an order suspending the primary across the state. There will be no primary today, and we'll reschedule it once we get through this.
Jennifer, please. Can you please walk us through the municipal services right now? What's going on with the subway, from the schools, the courts?
The subway, the schools, the chancellor, I commend the chancellor. He was on the phone a number of times with us. He coordinated very, very carefully what would happen. He thought it out, and he came up with a very good plan, which was essentially to keep the schools open, to keep the children in school, so we didn't have a large number of children in the different boroughs that would be released from school. They're being released, I shouldn't say as normal, but basically on the normal schedule. If parents aren't there to pick up the young children, then the children will be taken to a center, and the parents will be notified to come and pick them up. The children who have Metro cards, who normally travel on the subway, will be able to do that. The subways are functioning in 4 of the 5 boroughs, and can we get an update, Joe, on how the subway is doing in Manhattan?
All the lettered lines are working.
And in Manhattan?
In Manhattan lines, all the lettered lines.
All the lettered lines are working, including in Manhattan. And throughout the rest of the city, public transportation is normal. So the children should be able to return from school in the normal fashion. And if any children don't have parents to pick them up, then we'll hold them, let the parents know, and then the parents can come and pick
Mr.
them up.
Mayor, you mentioned you were on Barclay Street. What's the radius of damage that's been affected? How many other side streets around the world?
I don't think we know yet. The whole area of Lower Manhattan has been very much affected by it.
How many police and fire are involved? How many police and fire are involved? Like how many all NYPD off-duty officers that they come in, or like
All NYPD and FDNY officers are on duty now. And we're going to need all of them, and again, thanks to the governor and the way in which the state reacted, we will have 1,600 National Guard to relieve them over a period of time, so we can get some relief for them.
If anybody's looking for someone that may have been in the World Trade Center or in and around that area, what should they do? How can they do it?
We're going to give you numbers so that we can try to help coordinate that. Individual businesses have already done that, but we will as soon as we can find some time from the relief efforts, give you a number in which people can call, and then we can direct them to the right place.
The National Guard will always be or anything like that? Any lawlessness?
There have been no reports of lawlessness.
The governor of New York State, Governor George Pataki, the mayor, Mayor Giuliani, between him, the police commissioner just over on the right side of the picture there, the fire commissioner, the police commissioner more than anybody else being almost a restraining influence there, trying to say both to the governor and to the mayor, be careful what you say here. We don't have information on this, that, and the other thing. And on this question of casualties, it is the mayor who is attested to what everybody's got going, rushing around in their minds at the moment. More casualties, more than anyone can bear, but not willing to make perfect sense, not willing at this point to put a number on the people who they believe have been killed and or injured. The mayor did say that in one of the parks in the lower part of Manhattan, 1,500 people were regarded as walking wounded. They were aware of 600 people in local hospitals, and New York City has 170 hospitals, and as the mayor said, every one of them is available under these circumstances. And there are 150 critical conditions which were medevaced out or taken out under other circumstances, some of them going across the river to New Jersey, and in one case, according to the Canadian television network, saying had been airlifted as far away as Canada in order to get special medical care. Canada has several very strong centers in burn treatment, so it may be one of the reasons that patients have gone up that far. The mayor returning again to this thing which has clearly moved him, I think, more than anything else today, getting down there and seeing the 2 trade towers before they collapsed on themselves, and seeing the fires burning up high, and he said it every time, and seeing the people jumping from the top of the trade towers, driven to their deaths by the encroaching fire in the rooms in which they no longer felt they were particularly safe. And Governor Pataki, I think the first person today to say in the clearest language, there's got to be a retaliation. Lots of people said, you find out who has done this, you've got to be held accountable. Mayor being reluctant to say whether or not the country was in a state of war, which is a technical thing, I think, for him in many ways. But that's pretty much, I think, the summary of the highlights of their news conference, in which there seems to be a real coordination between the local and the state and the federal. And we have here with us a man who should know whether or not it's working, Jerry Hauer, who's the former head of New York City Mayor's Office of Emergency Management. And the last time I saw you was in that place on the west side of Manhattan, which you had designed for just an event, or maybe an event not just like this.
Yeah, this certainly is an incredible event, Peter. I don't think in our wildest imagination you could think about a day where simultaneous attacks, you know, we all think about it, we plan for it, but to have something like this occur is certainly, I view it as an attack on our nation.
But was it? I understand your emotional state. I'd like
Sure.
everybody's the same. I think we're all the same.
Sure.
Did you never consider that this was a possibility?
Well, we consider, and as we plan for New York City, we plan for massive events. In point of fact, one of the things that we did when I was still heading up OEM was we put in place memorandums of understanding with New Jersey, with Connecticut, Nassau, Suffolk County, to ensure that there was enough medical care available, that we had ambulances, police, firefighters, because we had to plan for horrific types of events. And as I told you when you were down, we planned for various types of incidents, chemical and biological types of attacks, for explosive types of attacks. You know, this is clearly just a devastating type of an incident here in the city.
The Office of Emergency Management office, that bunker, it's a pretty elegant bunker, and nor is it underground. It was second and third floors,
Right.
I think. That's out of operation at the moment.
Yeah, my understanding
That's
is...
something you never planned for.
Yeah, well, in fact, we did. The alternate was to go to police headquarters or to another location in the event that the command center was inactivated for some reason or rendered useless.
Do you know what has happened to it today? Do you know precisely what's happened to it?
I talked to some folks down there, and my understanding is that a lot of the debris has fallen and has blocked the access to the building. I've heard some reports that they're concerned about the structural stability of the building, but I have not been able to confirm that. But as part of our plan, there were backups. You always have backups in your planning, and that's what the city is doing today.
Now, you've had to walk to get here today, and that's perfectly understandable. We're on the west side of Manhattan, and things are that difficult. But do you have a sense of how it's going? And we've heard the mayor's appraisal and accepted as an honest one. Do you have any sense of how the system's working, and do you have any sense of how many people are still trapped or dead?
Well, first of all, I think that things are working as they should. I think that, you know, when you've got the best police and fire department anywhere in the world, they are doing everything to try and rescue people, to try and get near the building. But you've got to also realize the dynamics in a situation like this change a bit when you have a number of police and firefighters injured as well, and that's what we saw this morning. I was listening to the fire radio this morning when the building collapsed, and they were screaming for help because firefighters were trapped. So the emotion changes a bit, but these are extremely professional people. These are very heroic people. They will do everything they can to try and get in and rescue anybody that could potentially be alive in that building, recognizing that there is a potential for additional collapse.
What about the prospect, as the governor's announced, of the National Guard being called into New York for an act of terrorism? Is this anything you ever envisioned, and what will they do?
Well, in fact, that's the question, John, what they'll do. I would imagine that they will help support the police department, the fire department, provide logistical support, manpower, help with search and rescue. Whether or not they'll be used for law enforcement purposes, traffic control, things like that, I think I've not been privy to those discussions, so I don't know. But that's certainly possible.
Leading up to the millennium, you personally designed a series of exercises where a disaster would unfold and they would respond to it, a tabletop exercise, a field exercise, and then another disaster, and then another, to make it more and more difficult to stretch the resources to the limit. Was that worst case scenario design that you put together to see if the city could handle such a momentous disaster anything close to this, or have a component like this?
Yeah, you know, as we were planning for the millennium, we were planning for millions of people in Times Square and for the potential of something happening there. And we had to look at where all those resources would come from.
So did you have, in your design, did you have a truck bomb go off and then something else happen?
We had a sequence of events, both explosions, chemicals, biological incidents, and we looked at various types of terrorist events. And, you know, I think that what you're seeing here today is the result of having the New York City Fire Department, New York City Police Department well prepared. But again, I don't care where you are, anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. An incident like this is difficult and certainly stresses any system.
Flames and smoke. And then as we were moving away from the building, I heard, you know, a loud explosion and, you know, saw the second tower caught in flames. And at that point, everybody started running.
In the second tower, was like something went in and came out the other side, and a huge, huge fireball. And that was it. And then we left our building, we evacuated, and we're walking around for the last 2 hours.
I've been to Turkey, the earthquake 2 years ago in Turkey, 19,000 people died, and Bosnia and Macedonia, a number of places in the world. And this is certainly, when you start talking to a New York police officer and they start crying for what they've seen in the last couple hours, you know the seriousness and the gravity of the situation.
I was there when the tower, it just rained building, okay? And I was buried alive for 15 minutes until I scrambled out. And I'm just very concerned about the 6 firemen who were with me, because I'm not sure they all made it.
3 hours or this can happen. 3 hours. I don't know if I was going to live or die within 3 hours. So I just thank God I am alive. So I can say. I hope my coworkers are too. Ma'am, what floor?
For those of you joining us, it is 5 o'clock Eastern Time, and you are joining a live special of NBC News on the attack on America. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Lauer.
And I'm Katie Couric. It's been more than 8 hours since the first plane hit the World Trade Center tower this morning. We do know the devastation is unfathomable, but at this hour there is much we still do not know. For example, it is unclear how many people have died here in New York or at the Pentagon, where another jet crashed this morning as well. In Manhattan, it's believed that thousands of people may have been killed or injured, but a definitive number may not be known for days or even weeks. We do know 266 people died on board 4 airliners hijacked and turned into deadly weapons this morning.
This is the scene again right now on the southern tip of Manhattan. The twin towers of the World Trade Center have been wiped from the New York skyline. The towers collapsed within minutes of one another after the astonishing and horrifying attack early this morning. The country's financial center disappeared under a carpet of rubble, smoke, and choking clouds of dust. The size and scope of this attack, unimaginable. Within minutes of the 2 attacks, at the World Trade Center, another hijacked jet slammed into the helipad, which is only a few feet from the Pentagon, destroying one wing of that building. There are many casualties there as well. One congressional leader called it a second Pearl Harbor. About an hour ago, President Bush's communications chief had this to say.
The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his cabinet and national security team.
President Bush will be addressing the nation tonight. At this point in time, no specific time has been given for that address. Meanwhile, the U.S. military is on high alert. U.S. fighter jets have been seen on patrol over Manhattan as well as the nation's capital. For the first time in history, all airline traffic in the country has been suspended at least until noon tomorrow. The White House, Pentagon, and all other federal buildings have been evacuated. The president was in Florida when the attacks occurred. He was whisked onto Air Force One and appeared briefly at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana to reassure the country and condemn the attackers. Then Air Force One took off again and landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, and the president is now on his way to Washington. We have a lot to tell you this afternoon, beginning with NBC News' David Bloom, who's standing in front of a view that incredibly was dominated just hours ago by the two massive World Trade Center towers. David?
Well, Katie, it is, as you said, a horrific view behind me of Lower Manhattan, where as more than 8 hours after the first attack on the World Trade Center, the fires are still burning, the smoke still billowing. We know this. There are two questions at this hour that people still don't know the answers to. Number one, how many people were killed or injured in this series of attacks? Number two, who's responsible? We know, as you mentioned, that 266 people aboard the 4 hijacked planes are dead, that New York City officials estimate that most likely the casualties here in New York City alone will number into the thousands, that dozens, if not hundreds, of New York City police and firefighters are missing and presumed dead, those who went into the buildings that used to stand behind me trying to rescue people inside. This is how the series of terrorist attacks began just before 9 o'clock this morning. The first plane attacks the World Trade Center's South Tower at approximately 8:42 Eastern Time. Airline officials say at least 2 American Airlines flights and 2 United Airlines flights were hijacked today, and that the attack planes were the hijacked domestic flights. Roughly 21 minutes later, approximately 9:03 Eastern Time, the second large jetliner can be seen taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's North Tower. Emergency officials estimate 20,000 or more people may have been inside the 2 110-story buildings at the time of the attacks. Eyewitnesses report victims falling and in some cases jumping from the 2 buildings. At approximately 9:40 a.m. in Washington, D.C., a third hijacked plane crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames, one side of the building collapsing. Non-essential personnel from federal buildings, including the White House and the U.S. Capitol, are evacuated. 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. An unknown number of people still trapped inside. 1/2 hour later, at approximately 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Rubble, debris spreading for blocks. In a separate but apparently related crash, a fourth hijacked plane, a Boeing 767, crashes in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The FAA closes all domestic airports, shutting down all U.S. airspace. At this hour, airline and FAA officials believe the 4 hijacked planes include American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767, bound from Boston to Los Angeles with 90 passengers and crew aboard, crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77, bound from Washington Dulles to LAX with 64 passengers and crew, believed to have been the plane, crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 175, bound from Boston to Los Angeles with 65 people on board. By early accounts, the plane which crashed into the World Trade Center's North Tower. And finally, United Airlines Flight 93, the Boeing 757, which crashed in western Pennsylvania, carrying 45 passengers and crew. This is a live picture from our vantage point right now. And I have to tell you, Katie and Matt, the most sickening, the most disheartening thing is that there has been no diminution of this smoke whatsoever over the last several hours. If anything, the fires appear to be burning with greater intensity, the blackness of the smoke getting that much blacker in the last couple hours. Firefighters simply can't get in to fight these fires right now, and certainly here in New York City, it remains a grave, dire situation. Back to you.
All right, David Bloom. David, thank you very much.
It reported President Bush was in Florida when the attacks occurred. He flew from there to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he addressed the nation with some brief comments. We want to play those for you right now.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
Those were the remarks of President Bush earlier today. We want to go now to Washington, where NBC's Campbell Brown is standing by at the White House. Campbell?
Well, Matt, the president, as you mentioned earlier, is now on his way back to Washington, and we are expecting him to address the nation tonight from Washington, D.C. We don't know exactly where that will be from, whether it will be from the White House or exactly what time yet. But he is on his way here from the Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and that is the headquarters for the National Strategic Air Command. And he was in a bunker there that has the most sophisticated communications equipment, and it was from there that he was able to meet with his national security team by a live video teleconference. As you heard the president say, he's been in close contact all day with his national security team. They are, or the key personnel are still at the White House. The White House was, of course, evacuated earlier today. Around 9:30 this morning, staff left the White House. They were running from their offices across Pennsylvania Avenue, and this entire area where we are, Matt, around the White House, is fairly desolate right now. Most of the office buildings were also evacuated. But top personnel were allowed to stay at the White House, Vice President Cheney, as well as National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, and they are operating there out of what's called the Situation Room. And it's a wood-paneled room in the basement of the West Wing, secure with the highest security level and latest communications equipment. There's a big conference room there with video screens where the Vice President and the National Security Team, and presumably shortly the President, can sit and basically hear communications and intelligence from all over the world. It will likely be Command Central from here on out. Now, in addition to his National Security Team, we've been told the President also today spoke with New York Mayor Giuliani and New York Governor Pataki. He's also been in contact with his wife, First Lady Laura Bush, and the Bush daughter, also taken to an undisclosed secure location. Matt?
Campbell, I know there were some tense moments there earlier when that fourth plane that had been hijacked was unaccounted for, and there were some fears that perhaps it was headed for another site in Washington in addition to the Pentagon. Campbell Brown, thank you very much. Katie?
Let's now turn to Jim Miklaszewski, who was at the Pentagon. Mick was actually there when an American Airlines Boeing 757, American Airlines Flight 77, en route from Washington Dulles Airport to LAX with 64 people aboard, actually crashed into the Pentagon. Mick, why don't you tell folks, we were talking with you and trying to get an explanation as to what Pentagon officials were saying about the World Trade Center when suddenly you heard an explosion yourself.
That's right, Katie. We were trying to figure out exactly how the U.S. military intended to respond to what even they were characterizing as an obvious coordinated terrorist attack against the World Trade Center. Just about that time, the Pentagon was putting together a crisis action team to further assess any possible additional threats to either New York or Washington, D.C. When suddenly there in the Pentagon booth, fortunately on the other side of the building, the entire building shook, the windows rattled. I looked outside to see construction workers running, and in the hallways it was pandemonium. It quickly filled with smoke. And as you can see behind me, Katie, a scene that is eerily reminiscent of the federal building bombing in Oklahoma City, with the gaping hole and the slanting floors that collapsed in on each other. And for those who don't know how the Pentagon is constructed, I'm going to have to compete with the helicopter, one of the rescue helicopters that's taking off right now. But the Pentagon is constructed in 5 separate rings. What you see out here is the most outer ring, or the E ring. The plane impacted with such a force that it actually penetrated deep into the building into 3 separate rings. First the E ring, then through an open space, the D ring, another open space, and finally into the C ring. The actual plane, when it went into the building, punched a gaping hole in the first 2 floors. The upper floors were still intact, but in the ensuing fire, they eventually collapsed on themselves, and actually burying any additional hopes that additional survivors could be found alive. It took 4 hours for Arlington, Virginia firefighters to bring the blaze under control, to allow rescuers to get anywhere close to the devastated area to search for additional survivors. You see behind me now, lined up is a lot of search and rescue and recovery equipment, huge cranes. In those buses were some rescue teams from various emergency agencies from around the area. They donned their backpacks, emergency oxygen bottles, and headed for the building and the devastation you see behind us. There are many confirmed dead, scores confirmed injured, but the Pentagon does not yet have an actual casualty count. It could be hours, maybe even days, before they finally get that. Katie?
Mick, I understand that the U.S. military, as you well know, is on a state of high alert. Explain to people what exactly that means.
Okay, Katie, I think you were asking about the state of alert. Here at the Pentagon, it immediately went to the highest state of alert, Delta. And we're told now that all American forces around the world have been put at the absolute highest state of alert, which is actually a virtual state of war. They are manning weapons that are loaded. They are fully protected in whatever, in their helmets and their flak vests, preparing for the absolute worst. And throughout the day, this was kind of an eerie sight too. Throughout the day, we saw U.S. Air Force F-16 flying low cover over the city. And as one Air Force officer was standing by me looking up, said, "My God, we're now flying cover over the nation's capital."
We've heard actually those very same planes, or what appears to appear to be military planes, flying over Manhattan as well, Mick. Now, we understand that the flight that crashed near Pittsburgh was actually targeting Camp David. Is that your understanding?
That's what we're hearing from Pentagon officials, but no confirmation of that. And I must put a rumor to rest. There were rumors that an Air Force F-16 actually shot down that jet. Pentagon officials have said categorically that is not the case. There may have been an explosion aboard that jet before it crashed, but there was no U.S. Air Force plane involved in shooting down that airliner, which, as you say, appeared to have been headed for Camp David, perhaps out of Pittsburgh.
All right, Jim Miklashevsky. Jim, thank you very much under very difficult circumstances. Thank you, Mick.
All right, obviously, Bob Hager is NBC's expert on aviation. He joins us now. Bob, I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, we know that some people, or a couple of people on board the planes that were hijacked, did manage to get cell phone calls to people on the ground. Do we know if there was any communication between the cockpit crew of those flights and any ground control personnel?
We don't. They would be able to press a button in the cockpit and indicate that they were being hijacked, send out a special code. We don't know if they managed to get off any actual audio transmissions of any of this. But, oh, there's a picture of the actual plane hitting the World Trade Center, the South Tower. That's the United flight that came out of Boston. It had 65 people aboard. That was the second crash of the day. It came just 17 minutes after the first crash. You were asking about cell phone accounts. I want to treat this very carefully. It's unconfirmed information. There is an unconfirmed report that an American Airlines flight attendant was on a cell phone with her operations people describing some of what went on in one of these flights, the flight that went down in rural Pennsylvania, and that she said that the crew had been shot, and then a flight attendant was stabbed in the aisle of the plane, and then they lost contact with her before this reached its culmination in the crash. Now, again, that's an unconfirmed report. American Airlines has not confirmed it. It comes from an American Airlines source, but again, it's unconfirmed through official channels at American Airlines. It's not hard to imagine in this day and age that several people of different passengers and or crew may have been able to make cell phone calls, because that frequently happens with disabled planes in this day and age. All traffic has been grounded in the U.S. That's the first time that that has ever happened in history. It was called as of 9:30 this morning. Planes that were in the air were allowed to land later. The last of them had landed by mid-afternoon, and presumably at that point, federal officials felt that the immediate threat was over. However, they're going to keep the lid on all commercial airline traffic at least until noon tomorrow, and then they'll reassess. So how could this happen? Well, you can only get aboard a plane. Terrorists can only get aboard two ways, either through the X-ray screening, the passenger screening devices, or by sneaking through one of the doors using a magnetic card, or managing to go in behind an employee into a off-limits area such as a baggage room, working your way around onto the tarmac, or even people have done it onto empty planes. The FAA tests for that kind of thing all the time, and sadly the results of those tests have been poor. Using plainclothes people as testers, they've shown that they are able to get through X-rays, X-ray screening with fake guns, fake explosives quite frequently, and in the most recent test of the doors that are supposed to be secure doors, over 2/3 of the testers who tried it were able to get through. Then once on board, the question comes up, would it be a hijacker holding a gun or an explosive to a pilot's head, forcing them to do something, or would it be more likely they would have disabled the crew and taken over the controls themselves, in which case they would have had to know how to fly a 767 or a 757. Much more apt to be the latter, people say, in order to hit something like the World Trade Center with that exact precision. Matt?
Bob, let me ask you another question. There was a ground hold. Presumably thousands of people were on planes, perhaps even sitting on tarmacs at airports across the country. Do you know if there was any effort, Bob, to check the passengers on those planes who were planning to take off at about the same time as these 4 hijacked planes took off this morning?
I have not heard of anything like that. In other words, I see your point there to see if there were any more hijackers sitting on planes that had been stopped. And I've not heard of that, so I think there probably wasn't. But it's instructional that these planes, all 4 of them, they were scheduled anyway to take off within 25 minutes of each other. So this problem came on people so fast, and remember, it wasn't until after the second explosion that people really began to get the idea that these were hijacked aircraft going into buildings. So even though the FAA would have, and we don't know this, but we presume they would have had these codes to tell them hijackings were in progress, it would have taken a little while to put all this information together. So that's part of how sophisticated this all was.
All right, Bob, and one final question for you. There has been speculation that perhaps it was intentional that all of these planes, the 2 from Boston, the 1 from Newark, the 1 from Washington Dulles, were headed transcontinental flights, so they were carrying a lot of fuel, and the speculation has been that the terrorists chose those planes exactly because of that fuel, correct?
Just in my opinion, I think that's a foregone conclusion, that it just is too coincidental, that all too remarkable to be coincidental, that all 4 of those flights should be bound, 3 of them for Los Angeles, 1 for San Francisco.
I can't hear anything.
So it does seem as though they were chosen because they'd have a full load of fuel, and that would make the plane much more explosive when it hit.
All right, Bob Hager, thank you very much, Bob. We're looking at some live pictures right now in Lower Manhattan, very close to the World Trade Center, where we understand another building has now collapsed. Pat Dawson is standing by in that area. Pat, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you fine. If you remember, about no more than 20 to 25 minutes ago, we were talking about another building in the World Trade Center that officials here were very worried about, that they thought it might collapse. I referred to it as Building 7, and it used to be just over to the left of that white modern building down there. It literally was poking right above that, probably about a 20 to 25-story building. Moments ago, that building literally gave way and collapsed into the street down there. So that would be the third building in the World Trade Center complex that has collapsed today. That's what all the smoke that you see there now is. It literally is coming all the way up Manhattan here, probably another 10 or 15 blocks. The smoke from that collapse. That was a very large, probably, I'm guessing here, maybe a 20-story building that just collapsed there. As we have been saying all along, the most difficult part for officials here and for rescuers here is when can they go back, when can they start to go in there and investigate who is alive and who is dead. One of the reasons that they have not been able to go in there in large numbers is because they were afraid of exactly that. And no more than an hour and a half ago, we were told by Port Authority officials that they were afraid that there was another building in the complex. We later learned it was Building 7, the one we showed you a half hour ago, and just moments ago, that building collapsed. Matt?
Pat Dawson, hi, it's Katie. I was just curious, are there any other buildings in danger of collapsing in that general vicinity?
When we spoke to the Port Authority officials, as I said, probably in the last hour and a half, they indicated that they were worried about a couple of buildings, but really concentrated on Building 7. That is the one that just fell literally moments ago. They didn't indicate that they specifically thought that there was another building that was in trouble. They just said they were nervous, in their words, about a couple of buildings, and then specifically cited Building 7, which is the building that we just referred to. Katie.
All right, Pat Dawson. Pat, thank you very much. Meanwhile, Dan Abrams is on the telephone, apparently at the scene. Dan, what can you tell us?
Well, hi there, Katie. I'm standing about 5 or 6 blocks away from where that building just collapsed. The one piece of good news is...
Okay, obviously we have lost contact with Dan Abrams, who is nearby the building, as he said, that just collapsed. We'll try to maintain contact with him in just a few minutes. Meanwhile, Osama bin Laden is a name that we have been hearing all day long as an individual who may, and we emphasize may, be responsible for these terrorist acts. It is a name we have heard before as well. Hoda Khatbi has this report.
The early focus is on guerrilla leader Osama bin Laden because of the level of logistics necessary to carry out today's series of attacks. Bin Laden is a millionaire Saudi businessman believed to be living in exile in Afghanistan. U.S. officials link bin Laden to numerous terrorist attacks, including last year's bombing of the USS Cole in Yemen. He was blamed for the 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, in which 224 people died. And